The following haunting took place in Preston, Lancashire, UK, sometime in the 1970s, where the staff at a shoe shop were constantly harassed by a mischievous spirit. Heather Bailey was a young woman who had just started working at the store. It was not long before she would experience a troublesome entity. The problem for Heather was that nobody had taken the trouble to tell her that she would occasionally encounter an invisible voice, along with other unusual activities. Her first strange experience happened on her second day at the shop, when she was sitting in the toilet and a voice called out her name in a rather overbearing tone. Heather initially chose to ignore it, as she had not finished what she was doing. Then, to her annoyance, the voice was even more demanding. When it called out, "Heather! Heather!" she then quickly washed her hands and rushed out into the staff room, but found it was empty, as two staff members at the time were out the front serving customers and another had just re-entered the shop after buying coffee for their morning break. After the customers had left, Heather took the opportunity to ask who had urgently called out her name, as she was in the toilet at the time. Everyone looked at her with a blank expression. Then a Miss Ralston decided to come clean with Heather and said that it was probably the resident ghost who loves to call out your name in either an inquiring tone or in an urgent manner when you are sitting on the loo. She said we're all used to it. Any of the other staff members had told her the story, she would have laughed it off as a joke. But Miss Ralston is a rather serious person and accepted her explanation as fact. From that moment on, there was not a day gone by when Heather did not experience some strange happenings and felt that the ghost had possibly taken a strong interest in her. On one particular occasion, Heather was replacing a shoe in the display window, which was tricky because she had to climb into the window and slide between the other shoes on display and not touch any of them for fear of causing them to crash down all at once. Believing she had successfully completed the task, she was slowly backing out of the display window when she felt something push her in the back. Heather fell forward, crashing into the other display shoes, causing a domino effect where the shoes came crashing down. She screamed out in annoyance, believing someone had deliberately pushed her, but on turning around, found that nobody was there. All other staff members were occupied elsewhere and too far away. Who or what had just shoved her? Heather resigned herself to having to redecorate the display window. The next morning was quiet, so the staff took the opportunity to sit at the far end of the shop and chat between themselves. Close to where they were sitting was a door that led down to the cellar. The shop was a very old building, and the cellar was cold, damp and creepy, and staff would avoid going down there. As they were talking amongst themselves, a strange sound suddenly emanated from the cellar. All talking immediately ceased as they sat listening intently. They could hear display stands clattering and chairs being scraped along the stone floor. It was as if someone were frantically looking for something. However, none of the women would dare go down and investigate. Then the most senior staff member, Mrs. Clayman, had heard enough and decided to check out the commotion. As she started to descend the stairs, the noise immediately stopped, and the other staff members felt an almighty rush of cold air blast out into them from the cellar. Heather then asked Miss Ralston whether this had ever happened before, and she said it had, but not to the extent of this one. A few days later, Heather was serving a customer and noticed that an elderly couple in the front of the shop were being rather difficult, and the man was extremely rude to the staff member. After about 25 minutes, the man stood up and without the slightest thank you started to storm out of the shop. However, just before reaching the front door, something appears to have pushed him, whereas he found himself red-faced in a heap on the floor. He quickly stood up and glared around, but nobody was near enough at the time to have pushed him. Heather felt that the resident ghost had also had enough of the obnoxious man and helped him on his way out of the shop. The next few days, the haunting seemed to get worse, where items started to go missing, and on one particular occasion, one of the staff went out back to deal with the weekly repairs. To this, she needed to unpack the repaired shoes and write down the names of the customers using a black marker pen. However, the pen was missing and had always been kept in the same place. The pen was finally located when one of the women walked into the toilet and found it standing upright in front of the toilet bowl. How on earth did it get there? All the staff would take it in turns to do the cleaning, and afterwards Mrs. Clayman would do a thorough check to make sure it had been cleaned properly and would often add a final touch herself. Mrs. Clayman was quite obsessed with such matters, but on one particular occasion her patience was stretched to the limit. One Friday morning, she walked into the staff room and the toilet and looked around and quickly stormed out in a rage, screaming, "Where's Doris? Where's Doris?" and walked around searching for her. The other staff wondered what the drama was all about and walked through to the staff room and into the toilet, and there were gasps all around when they could see that scouring powder had been sprinkled everywhere. It was as if someone had gone completely crazy. They first thought that the container had exploded by itself, blasting the powder all around the toilet, but then found the empty container in a corner of the small room. They all raced to the front of the shop, in time to see Doris casually walking back into the shop carrying a packet of toilet rolls under her arms. Mrs. Clayman said to her, "Fancy leaving the toilet in such a mess. What if someone wanted to use it?" After the verbal attack, Doris went red-faced and did not take kindly to being chastised in such a manner, and was curious as she followed Mrs. Clayman to see what the fuss was all about. As she reached the toilet and saw powder everywhere, she screamed out, "I did not leave it like that!" I looked as shocked as everyone else. Mrs. Clayman did not believe and remained grumpy to all her staff. 2 staff members approached Mrs. Clayman and confirmed that when they had earlier gone to the toilet, it was spotless. Then Doris had left to purchase the toilet rolls, and nobody else had been in the toilet before she had started her inspection. Strangely though, a few months after Heather had started working at the shop, it was temporarily closed for renovations from ceiling to cellar, and even the toilet was replaced. When the staff returned to work, they found that the haunting had ceased. Because the spirit was not malevolent in any way, but was more mischievous, the staff started to miss their resident ghost and the various tricks it had played on them.